Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Come on in, grab a seat. My name is Alan Schimmel. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, founder of TechStrong Group, and we are the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Cloud Native Now, TechStrong TV, and a bunch of other properties. You can go to the website and check it out. More importantly, though, we've been kind of the voice in DevOps for 10 years now. And for the last 8 years, every year on Monday of RSA Week, we're lucky enough to work with my friends at the RSA conference in putting on a DevOps Connect DevSecOps seminar, which is a full day event. We did it again this year. It was probably our biggest yet, as this RSA seems to be the biggest one. But this year we're doing something a little special and different as well. We're in the middle where we're actually about to release a major report that we've been working on called DevOps Next. You know, it is 10 years since DevOps.com. It's probably 12 to 14 years since DevOps first burst on the scene. And there are a lot of people who are saying, what's next? Has DevOps lived up to its promise? Has it done what we thought it was going to do? And what about DevSecOps? It's become such an important part of the whole DevOps movement, to the point where I've got 3 of the biggest DevOps companies up here with us today. Every one of them is going to tell you they're a DevSecOps company. We don't even say DevOps anymore, we're DevSecOps. And they're not the only ones. The rest of the major players, there aren't that many other major players, but they'll also tell you they're all about DevSecOps. I started doing that DevSecOps event here at RSA, as I mentioned, 8 years ago. At the time, I had my friend Gene Kim, Josh Corman, John Willis, a bunch of other folks at that first one. And the idea was to bring together the DevOps tribe, because it was very much a tribal thing back then, and the security community. And I'll be really honest with you, they hated each other, right? The DevOps people said, those security people, they make us crazy. All they do is stop us from doing what we need to do. We just want to code. And that really hasn't changed. They still just want to code. The security people, and this hasn't changed either, unfortunately. It's gotten a little better, but the security people say, no one cares about security but us. We're the only people who can make sure, or at least do our best to try to make sure security gets built in. But that itself was a major thing, building in security instead of bolting it on. And over the last 8 years, we've seen this tribe and community come together. It's not nirvana, I don't know, there's still rough edges, but certainly developers understand that quality code is an important part of their job. And security understands that without getting developers and DevOps people, or we think they understand that, without getting developers and DevOps people involved in creating quality code, which is kind of synonymous, or code word for security, we're never going to achieve our goals in security. So we've undertaken to look at, let's cut the BS out, let's get to the real facts here. Is DevSecOps working? And if not, why? Where is it working? Where is it not working? More importantly, what's next? How do we, everything here is AI, right? It's it seems like it's RSAI week here this week. What's AI's effect going to be on this? How are we going to continue this evolution? How are we going to make this community and tribe come together? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to jump into it. Before I introduce our audience, or our panel, just a couple of quick things. For those of you who might have done RSA moderated panels before, I'm not your usual moderator. I just don't introduce them and let them talk. I'm going to be an active participant. And I know you get these forms to fill out, and if you want to say he talked a lot, you could say it now. Secondly, I'm not big on slideware. We do a lot of webinars at DevOps.com, and our audience tells us they don't like slides. So hopefully we're going to have some good conversation here today. I do have notes, and if anybody wants to contact me, I'm happy to send you the notes. And as a matter of fact, anyone on our panel, if you'd like to talk to them about things, we're all available for you to talk to. With that being said, though, let me now introduce our esteemed panel here for DevSecOps Next, navigating the next era with industry titans. It's big words to put out there. To my immediate left right here, joining us from Harness is Sid Chaudhary. Sid is the SVP and GM DevSecOps and DevX products at Harness. Sid, beyond that, if you want to say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Excited to be here. We at Harness started as a CI/CD platform company and have been making strides into helping bring security into the CI/CD era. In that process, helping DevOps and developers sort of realize the value proposition of shift-left security testing, supply chain security, generative AI, and so on. I have been with the company for about 4 years and excited to be still building for all the practitioners out there.
Thank you. Our next speaker, and I got to give him a really special thank you. We just drafted him in this morning. Sean Ahmed, Chief Product Officer at Cloudbees. Unfortunately, his flight was canceled coming in. Actually, first flight was canceled, second delayed. He couldn't make it. We reached out here to Bashir, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Cloudbees, and he most graciously stepped in, prepped him up on what we have, and I'm thankful for him being here. Bashir, and if I mispronounce, I apologize, Janjua, and Bashir, why don't you give them a little bit of your background?
Hi, everyone. So about 19 months ago, my startup was acquired by Cloudbees, and we were building the CI/CD and DevOps platform for the previous 5+ years. So it's wonderful to have all the scale and the operations in marketing, sales, as well as in the technology support to actually launch the platform. So we just launched the platform in November. We are very proud and hope that it can help.
Thank you, Bashir. Our last, but certainly not least, panel member comes to us from my friends at JFrog. And I hope I pronounce it right. Eyal?
Eyal Dement.
Eyal Dement. Eyal, thank you. And Eyal is VP of Product, but specifically within security. And why don't you talk about your background? Eyal?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and joining you guys. Thanks for your time. So I'm the VP Product for JFrog Security. JFrog has been around for about 16 years, if I'm not mistaken, primarily known for its Artifactory product came in from DevOps. And about 3 years ago, has made a substantial acquisition with a company called Vdoo, Israeli-based, and has really driven into the DevSecOps space. And ever since, I've introduced some products into the marketplace, and specifically, we are providing an end-to-end software supply chain platform, including security from all the way shift left, all the way from on all edges. And yeah, been with the company for about 1.5 years now. Based in Tel Aviv in Israel, and glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you, Eyal. So, DevSecOps, right? Let's talk about it. You know, I live in a DevOps bubble. I'm the first to admit it. And unfortunately, I think each of our panelist members up here live in a DevOps bubble too. We think, of course, everyone knows what DevSecOps is. Of course, everybody knows what shift left is, and we're all doing it. For our DevOps Next research report at TechStrong Research, we looked at we surveyed hundreds, actually a couple thousand people right now, on their DevOps adoptions. We interviewed a whole bunch of practitioner organizations about what they're doing around DevSecOps. More than that, we have about 40,000 articles on DevOps.com, and we looked at what are people clicking on? What are people reading? Because they vote with their mouse, or their mice, I guess is the term. They vote with their mice about what's important to them. And the results of all that research were, I don't want to say disheartening, but they were contrary to what I think we believed, which is not everyone believes in DevSecOps, not everyone is doing DevSecOps. Yes, there are what we call bubbles or pockets of DevOps within most organizations today. Probably something like 70% have dabbled in DevOps and with it a little DevSecOps. But the fact of the matter is probably 20% or less are actually doing DevSecOps at an organizational scale. Less than 20%, right? If you look at your classic crossing the chasm models, 15% are early adopters, the cool kids, right? Then you got to cross the chasm to get to the mainstream. And you know, there's that 35% early mainstream adopters, 35% later mainstream adopters. We've barely, according to our research, barely scratched the surface of the mainstream for DevSecOps. I'll throw it out to our panel here. Is that surprising to you? Why do you think? And this is not new. This has been going on for 8 to 10 years. How much longer do we give this before we, say something's not working right, or we have to do something differently? I'll throw it out to each of you. What's your thoughts on that? Sid, start off.
I can begin with that. I agree with your assessment that it's a work in progress. I think if I take the DevOps perspective, it feels like the goalpost keeps changing on them. Initially, it was about let's make sure we're just doing vulnerability scanning of our code repos and make sure the developers can fix issues. Then we realized that that's not complete enough. Now we have to scan open source dependencies. Then that's not complete enough. Now we have to tackle container scanning. Then that's not enough. We have to tackle DAS scanning, IaaS scanning. And so from a DevOps standpoint, it feels like the goalpost that I initially set out as success is no longer the success because the security team seems to be coming up with new challenges. And I can see from the security side is, well, that's real. The hackers, the attackers are always one step ahead. And it's as the protectors of the company's information, we have to catch up and we have to remain ahead. So we have to keep on introducing these new tooling. And now we'll certainly talk about supply chain security, which is another attack vector. Nobody wants to be in the news like a SolarWinds or a Code Curve and so on. So that is now coming into picture. And then, at RSA, generative AI is all the rage. And I feel like that is another one that the DevOps team will have to tackle. So, the work in progress continues, and the challenge then comes on to practitioners and solutions providers like ourselves to make it simpler and make sure that the value proposition that we started out with continues to remain realized.
Fair enough. Anyone else?
Yeah, so one aspect is what you mentioned is from a tool perspective, a lot of tools, and they need to be able to maintain those as new challenges are entering the attack vectors. Looking out for new solutions that take care of that versus platforms and so on. The perspective I will share is the developer experience. So it's the developer buy-in, where a lot of these considerations where you have the DevOps practitioners on the one hand, but on the other hand you have to have the buy-in from the developers, making sure the developers are truly bought in and not doing stuff because they are forced to do so. Developers are not that type of a beast that likes to be forced to do something. So being able to get their buying, get their trust with all these different products and with your processes is a challenge, is a work in progress. And it also has a lot to do, in my mind, with the collaboration at the management level. So, the engineering leadership, the DevOps leadership, the security leadership, and how do they really look at this as a shared goal and something that they need to address together? And so their teams look at their leadership as one team, or is it not really the case? So it's also a cultural thing, alignment of interests and prioritization and developer experience in my experience.
I agree. So I was looking at the Software Global Code Report. 11% of the time the developers are spending every week writing code. And the rest of the 89% of the time they're spending everything that has to do something with the code. Now, Gartner says 29%. Either way, between 11 and 29% of your time being spent on writing code, that's really not what you want to do. If you look today in the bioengineering field today, not a single living cell in plants or animals we know everything about today as humanity. We don't. Just imagine you know only 30% of the files or the code in the Linux system, but you still have to use it. We have such complex problems ahead of us. We don't understand photosynthesis, for example, today. Because we don't have enough compute power, we don't have the right software to address these complex problems. And we are so much in the weeds of DevSecOps, okay? We have to really grow up, I think, as industry, and we should appreciate what JFrog, Harness, GitLab, and CloudBees as well, and the rest of the industry have done for the software industry. Rewriting the platforms, DevSecOps platforms, is really not the goal. The goal is to solve the complex problems that the industries haven't even touched yet. Imagine if we are able to decode photosynthesis process, for example, alone. It can change the future of the food security, the things that matter to us as humanity. Imagine if we can truly personalize the medicine. But we're not there yet. I'm very hopeful with the emerging technologies, with the quantum computer coming, we can solve those problems. But for that, we need to really evolve the software industry. And we have to get out of this business that every company, they believe they need to build their own platform. It is expensive, it is complex, it's really a lot of work. I spent the last 10 years before getting acquired. I'm finally sleeping. So grateful. It is tough. Please invest your energies. Just think, do you want your developers to spend 11% of their time coding, or do you want them to spend 100% of their time coding and creating wow experiences for your customers, for your consumers? So the adoption is not there yet, but we need to have it.
People, process, technologies. I've been in this industry for 30 years. It hasn't changed. People, process, and technology, and you just heard all three of them kind of hitting on it with culture and so forth. With all due respect, I love my developer friends, and I'm sorry that they only spend 11 to 29% of their time developing code. But if we're not developing secure code, I'd rather we don't develop code. And I think that, and I don't know how you guys feel out in the audience, but mostly 75% of you are probably in the security space. Would you prefer to develop less code that's more secure, right? Or develop more code that maybe is not as secure? In Nirvana, we want it all. And really, to me, that's why I got into DevOps. That was the promise, to have it all, to develop secure code faster, better, higher quality. We're 8 years in. We've moved where, when I first met my friends at CloudBees, they were the Jenkins company. JFrog was the Artifactory company. Harness was probably Jody Banzai's second coming after AppDynamics, with all due respect, right? Look how far we've come. Each of these companies are out here today with a platform, and they call it a DevSecOps platform, right? Why aren't these platforms, is my question, why aren't these platforms helping us, not just developers, because we're not going to take up a collection for developers. The security people have a hard job too. Why aren't these platforms helping our developers, our security people, our DevOps teams create more secure software?
Alan, it's really about the adoption, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't force developers to use it. Honestly, I think in most companies, it's the internal platform development efforts that are eating up all the time. And in most cases, it doesn't work, because it's really not a part-time job to write platforms.
No.
I mean, they still have that continuous chaos versus continuous delivery.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think when customers come to us, then we see them, in like, there is a self-selection bias, right? They come to us because they want to solve problems. When as Eyal mentioned, when the engineering, DevOps, and security leadership is sort of thinking, sort of a unified goal standpoint, that's when we see magic happens. Because tooling you can buy from anybody. I don't think that's the biggest challenge. The organizational change where when security teams wanted to have total control and DevOps and developers want extreme velocity, those somebody has to take the time to bring all of them together and say that your extreme velocity is most likely a illusion of success, because at the end of the day, you are not creating customer value if your customer data gets hacked once it gets to production. So that kind of thinking where take time to bring the leadership together, and they set I would say organizational incentive structures that prioritize, let's say number of vulnerabilities reaching production, things like supply chain security being addressed via SBOMs and supply chain software artifacts, SALSA levels. So those are the places where we see maximum impact, as opposed to just purchasing a bunch of tools and expecting some magical outcomes.
Yeah, I would add to that. So a lot of times for us, when customers approach us on this and on the platform aspect, so one thing is the platform, the product, the solutions themselves. And the other is from the adoption perspective, even when there's alignment in, between the teams and between the leadership, is about best practices and what does the journey look like for companies in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time? Where should they, start unraveling this problem and as part of their journey? And they're looking for us, as an example, is what's the best practices in our industry? How can you help us with the maturity for our organization? A lot of times what we see is companies trying to do things their way. And like you mentioned about companies building their own platforms and spending a lot of time on that. Also trying to be too sophisticated and not really learn from others and best practices that can be shared across different industries and different company sizes and so on. So that's a lot of times what we find that companies are missing in their adoption journeys, and stuff that they are coming to us, again, as a bias, but to assist them to resolve.
Yep. So I presented at RSA many times over the years. One of the things I always, and they coach you to help with the audience, is give them 3 things. Okay. 3 things that they can do that can help, right? This is navigating the DevSecOps Next. We've got these platforms. Obviously, platform adoption sounds like it's an issue. The idea of having a team, it showed itself right here, right? We're talking about the developers do that, the security people want that. But we want to have one team. And it's not just dev and ops and security, testing, platform engineers, SREs, they're all part of this equation today, right? So we've got teams, we've got platform. Processes, the third piece of it. What are the 3 things you can give to our audience that they can take out of here among any of those 3 areas that can help them navigate what's next, right? Because we haven't even talked about Gen AI and what this is going to do to it. But where we are now, what can they do to tangibly make something better here? What can they take out of here with them?
Yeah, I think, so DevSecOps, right? You can take it from each of their perspectives and make the progress happen. So first is developer experience. So if we can bring the ability to catch security issues right at the time the developers are starting to code, and there are a bunch of tooling around that, including things like cloud development environments, secure artifact repos, where curated libraries are present. We'll talk more about Gen AI, where code assistants can help you write secure code. Combine all of them, and when the code hits the commit, then do the another level of scanning so that you can identify any remaining issues. And before even code gets merged into the main branch, you allow the developer to take action, because at that time they're not being stopped necessarily, they are being guided, right? So there is a difference in when you stop them right before production deployment, that's a high penalty, and on their, because they have to now context switch, they would have moved on into a new problem, and now you'll bring them back. So keeping that in context for the developer is number one. On the security side, as the various developers are merging code and ensuring that they are contributing to the new feature development, let's say, the security team's job is to collaborate with the platform engineering team and create the golden path to production, where the security gates are rightly established and you'd have a complete visibility end to end as to where a given, let's say, a feature or a release is with respect to its security posture. And the third piece is, in my mind, around governance, risk, and compliance, where you have to not only tackle the challenges of today, which is, let's say, known vulnerability management. You have to start thinking about you have to start thinking like a hacker. You have to start thinking like, where will things go wrong? And starting from your original threat modeling to all the way to, tool security and open source dependencies, you create a layer of risk and compliance reporting and visibility that then can feed back to both development and security engineering so that they can collaborate on fixing these harder, unknown problems in some respect. And the combination of these three things should, again, there is no magic wand here. If you continue to do it, week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter, your posture will completely change from where you are today.
Fair?
Please.
A question for you guys. Toyota Production System, they have the code. Any employee in the assembly line can pull the code if there's any issue. Please tell me, what's your guess? How many times in a well-run Toyota Production System that code get pulled every day? Any guesses, please? Give a number. 8 times.
Someone said 100, I heard.
100. What's your guess?
50.
20.
4,000 times a day. Okay? Every piece, every component, and all the information about that component is in the assembly line. And they know exactly every single piece that goes to build the car and rolls out. Why is software any different? Software is a product. It's supposed to delight and excite the users, even the platforms, right? So the question is, can the platform mimic the culture and the way the organization is organized? Can it do that? Platform is not going to go and change the culture. It has to adapt to the culture. Imagine the hierarchy of the organization, the way the teams are, the way the business units are organized. If the platform adapt to that architecture and make sure every single element, every line of code, every template, the entire programs are all within the reach of everyone who is supposed to be accessing them. I was talking to a dear friend who runs a big financial institution, and he told me, and I quote, he said, I have 100 million plus lines of code in the shop. And there was 11 lines of code that brought us to our knees. The problem is we could know which 11 lines had a problem. Can the platform self-soothe? Can it assess? Is it intelligent enough to really perform that and tell you where the problem is? And I think this is where we are very humbly proud to have a platform that actually is built to implement that architecture, to adopt to the organizations.
Yeah, so I'll add one more thing, I guess. Very much focused, I don't want to repeat some stuff, but very much focused on the developer experience. So our experience at JFrog, where things move, you were talking about the takeaway, where things move very rapidly is where developers are really empowered with clarity into why they are being asked to do something and giving all the information required to give them the vetting that has to do with it, along with the mitigation, resolution steps, automatic remediation when it's related to AI solutions or whatnot with automatic pull requests and so on. But we find that the more information developers are provided with, but not in a verbose way, but in a curated manner where it's very clear to developers to understand why they're being asked to do what they're doing, we find that that's one of the biggest levers of adoption with our customers. And if this is something that in your organizations you feel like you get feedback that your developers are not empowered enough or don't have clarity enough into why they're being tasked to do whatever it is, I would urge you to revisit that and think, what should you change in your processes, in your tooling, in your culture to change that, because that's the biggest workforce within the organization is the dev team. Those guys want to move from 11% to 30, 40, 50%. So enable them to do that, and that's our biggest. That's my biggest recommendation right now.
Excellent. So Bashir mentioned Toyota and components, right? I think one of the biggest, I think we all agree, one of the biggest problems facing us from a DevSecOps perspective going forward is software supply chain security. The White House, the federal government, and everybody else is all jumping on this. We have the era of SBOMs, and we all focus on our supply chain, software supply chain. And it really, the good news is the reason we focus on it is because we realize that software today is built as in a factory, right? When I first got involved in technology a very long time ago, software was very much a bespoke sort of cottage guild industry, right? Where every piece of software was very customized and you started from scratch kind of stuff and you built it. Today it's a factory with third-party parts and dependencies and their dependencies and so on and so on. And it probably represents, we're seeing it in the open source world, right? We do this big, the Microsoft guy who found people were putting malicious code into open source projects. And we think that that's not an isolated issue. It's probably pretty widespread. So DevSecOps is becoming synonymous with software supply chain security. What can we do going forward is it just a question we're going to attach an SBOM, the little bill of materials to every component? I don't know how well that works. What can we do with software supply chain security to make things better?
Yeah, I can take that. So we see that as like a two-pronged problem. First is, governing the usage of open source libraries by, generating SBOM as early as possible inside your code repo, inside your container image, and then sort of getting to this holistic SBOM that you can now attach next to this artifact as it goes to prod. You now have a searchable store of all the open source libraries and where those artifacts are deployed in production, so that if the next zero-day vulnerability comes up, you have an ability to take action and you're not scrambling as to where am I using the newly vulnerable version of Log4j. So that's like, I would say, a 101 of software supply chain security. And that's 101 because open source usage is, I think, somewhere between 80 to 90% of all code that goes to production. So if you are not doing that much, then you are significantly exposed, right? The second aspect is about your CI/CD tool security and the posture management of your code repos, your CI/CD pipelines, your artifact registries, your infrastructure as code management solutions, because those also can be vulnerable. People will have elevated privileges inside them. Those tools can be open source and they can have vulnerabilities inside them. And they can be significantly misconfigured, right? As that allows a hacker to sort of bypass and create a SolarWinds like hack. So that also requires you to continuously scan the tooling side of the house and figure out who can actually remediate. And many times the remediation is back to the security team because they are usually the ones that have admin privileges on much of these tools. Developers are not going to help you if your code repo allows a malicious commit to go in, because they are focused on their puzzle, which is to create new features. So this two-pronged problem has to be tackled simultaneously in order for you to get handle on the whole aspect of software supply chain security.
I don't disagree with any of comments, further lead-ons?
So as I said earlier, just like in the Toyota production system, we need to trace every single component and the data about that component, the metadata. So we exactly know who made the change, who made the last update. So you really, really know everything, and the system and the platform actually helps you navigate through this. So there's nothing unknown for you. Everything is there. All you really have to do is just actually use the platform, right? The platform is intelligent enough, is comprehensive enough. All the processes are well thought out and automated. And the rest is really collaborating, running your day-to-day operations. So this problem is solved honestly and very methodically. And I believe to a certain extent, his platform, their platform, as well as Git, they all have this capability.
So-
The visibility is there.
So I'll add on top of that. I look at SBOM most of the time as an evolving creature, in the sense that the SBOM changes throughout the software development lifecycle, and it's important to not lose attention of that and make sure that when you look at your SBOM generations and scanning capabilities across the SDLC, that you verify that you look at coverage and accuracy and making sure that you don't have blind spots. And if you're not familiar with your blind spots as ones that you need to prioritize and figure out how you cover those, whether it's manually with automatic tooling, if you are not familiar with them, it means that you have blind spots that you need to go after and figure out which ones they are. And continuously understand that SBOM, while I agree with you completely, it's a problem these platforms solve, but it's not a 0-1 kind of a question. It's not a do you have SBOMs or not. It's always, for me, always about accuracy and coverage, and that keeps evolving. Different technologies have different challenges, and things progress as you move from source to binaries with configuration files, IAC, and so on. Things get added into your releases throughout time. It keeps evolving, and you have to be aware of that. Make sure that you keep up with things that are happening. Keep up with your blind spots, and don't lose attention with that.
Yeah, we like to talk about SBOMs as an insurance policy, and just like an insurance policy, it has to be actionable when you need it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will pay for it from your own pockets, right? So,
Fair?
But Ellen, you need to know which 11 lines of code.
And that is, right, knowing which of the 11 between the 100 million lines is part of it. You know what? So we mentioned it a few times, but I've purposely stayed away from it because unfortunately it sucks too much oxygen out of my life. But we need to talk about AI and generative AI and what role this is going to have in DevSecOps going forward. You know, it's like when you have a newborn child, the horizon's unlimited, but it could go the other way, right? You hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Generative AI is kind of like that, right? It has so much promise. It's going to make things better, but it's going to take your job. Maybe not your job. Who knows? But it's certainly going to have an impact, and it'll have an impact both good and bad. Let's talk about the good and the bad of AI as it relates to DevSecOps in both the near term and then maybe the mid to longer term future.
yeah, I think let's start with the good part, right? If I'm sure all of us in security feel this burden that we are like a 5-member team asked to support a 1,000-member engineering org, which is developing across 10 different application stacks running on very complex tooling that have been cobbled together from various acquisitions and internal priorities, and then deploying into multiple kinds of cloud and cloud platforms. So if we are that organization, then generative AI is probably a way for us to start getting I would say, coverage on the problem set that we have been, so desperately lacking, right? Because it can take some of the manual toil away on, providing us recommendations, or identifying blind spots, or doing runtime monitoring for us. So from a security side, I'm very excited on the prospects of generative AI. But on the bad side, if somewhere I read that developers are feeling very good that they are able to generate code a lot faster, right? And I think that's in a way, it's a good thing because feature development will accelerate. But the security of that code is not up to the mark, is what all the initial analysis is starting to show, which means that the need for proper DevSecOps practices to catch these generative AI generated code as early as possible. And again, back to giving the developer context as to why this code that they just brought in by using an internal LLM or copied from let's say Stack Overflow is not the right answer, and providing the right recommendations, that is going to become very, very critical in the near term. In the longer term, I think if the models get trained and that the generation of insecure code, at least the percentage decreases, then we'll have a different problem, I feel, where the hackers have always been 1, 2, 3 steps ahead. We'll find new problems to go ahead and solve because neither the developers nor the security engineers will be able to sort of have a grasp of the new set of problems that will come by using generative AI both ways.
Yes.
Yeah, let's start with the good. So I'll add on top of what you said in terms of taking a smaller team and giving them more power resources to complete more challenges. So challenges like prioritization. So how do you prioritize with the ton of vulnerabilities that we have within our releases, within our applications? How do we prioritize better? So AI is. I'm really excited for this and how platforms like ours can utilize that to give prioritization assistance in that regards. If we look at the bad side, the blessing and the curse with AI in that sense is, so you mentioned, for example, code generation by AI. So having a strong DevSecOps practice, and specifically source code scanning for 0 days or first-party vulnerabilities is critical. I mean, research that we've done, we see that happening quite often, and it's going to change because the vendors providing these tools will do better, but you still need to have your guardrails set up, otherwise you're at risk. But also another thing that we see coming up is the use of third-party models. So, for example, coming from Hugging Face or others, these are not potentially new attack vectors for attackers. These are actual vectors happening right now, where attackers are taking advantage of models to use to get your developers to use malicious models with malicious code in there. So looking at, we at JFrog, when we look at the ML models, we look at them as a package. We look at them as a third-party component and how to address those similarly to how you address open source packages, and really understand that this is happening. A lot of times when we speak to customers, we see that it is unknown. It's like people sometimes think of this as like a solved problem. There's no risk involved, or the risk is low, where the matter of fact is it's the reverse. So look at this now. This is not in the near. This is now, and this is only going to go on and on for the foreseeable future.
Fair.
I believe it was 1776 when Sir James Watson perfected the steam engine. It was a simple invention, but really look at it for a second. It replaced the human muscle and animal muscle. What we have achieved as humanity with the AI, we have been able to replicate intelligence. How do we use it? It's the very beginning of it, but I see a very exciting future. I believe it will create exciting opportunities for developers to have the co-pilots And it's just really imagination is the limit, how far we can imagine. These are early days. Just think what kind of mistakes we made in the early days of Industrial Revolution. It's the process that will get mature as we move forward, and we are just starting the process. However, I believe at the intersection of emerging technologies, such as quantum computing, I'm super, super excited. What can the AI and quantum computer intersection, we can solve the most complex problems there. And I think that is where these co-pilots will enable the developers to get truly excited to really solve the bigger problems. For example, once we understand the quantum mechanics behind photosynthesis, we can modify and edit that process. And imagine we can create vegetables and flowers and crops in a much shorter time by editing the process of photosynthesis. Dr. Michio Kaku, he wrote a book, The Quantum Supremacy. I'm fascinated with the book, honestly. It's amazing. Highly recommend it to read. But there's a glorious future ahead of us to solve very complex problems. And I believe AI, quantum intersection, we have to really bring it to the software. And the platform is the way to go because it creates discipline. It creates disciplines engineering. That's why we need platforms.
Excellent. So we have less than 5 minutes left. We have maybe 3, 4 minutes left, but I wanted to save a little time at least for some questions. So if you raised your hand first? No, I'm sorry. I got her first, you're second.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering how, for those of us that have to create our own platforms for various reasons, the tooling of those platforms with the licenses for the various tools are sometimes prohibitive. How is there a movement on, it's like if someone just reads the report, right, they're supposed to get a license. So how does that, how do you all, I'm sure your platforms are tooled and have to have licenses, and then how do people who have to create their own platforms and have to tool their pipelines, I think the licensing costs become very difficult for full adoption, right? Thank you.
So in our platform, we have a system where it assesses every piece of open source software, and it knows if it's licensable and if it's free use, and it can guide the team, so we're not violating anything. In the compliance and governance is taken care. It's part of the platform itself, a feature.
Anybody else?
Sorry, I think she was referring to the cost of the platform
right,
license.
Tooling license. Yeah, I can touch on that. I think security tools over the years have been primarily geared towards that select few security engineers, and as a result have had a bigger price point because there are only 5 of you in a company. The tooling vendor wants to make sure that they are able to charge you enough. The world is moving away from that model. As far as we can see, we are a developer security or a DevSecOps platform. Then every developer has a license to use our software, and the price point will be significantly lower than, let's say, we're trying to make sure thousands of developers live and breathe in our platforms as opposed to 5 security engineers use us daily, right? So the dynamics are very different, and in that world, I think it will democratize, I would say, security best practices in a much more wider organization space, and anybody and everybody should be able to use and consume software. At least that's our point of view on this problem.
Yeah, very, very similar to that. Moving to by developer is something that we're seeing very often. It allows you to have, when we speak about adoption and driving organizations to adopt, allows you to have more of a journey. Not all or nothing kind of an approach, and I agree completely with what you said. Yeah.
Excellent. This gentleman was next.
One of the things I discovered this year when I started working on CI/CD pipelines is that there's a philosophical debate that I don't hear people talk about, but I know is there with the CD in CI/CD. For me, I think of zero trust. I'm a security guy. And I think CI/CD, the CD should mean continuous deployment, or continuous delivery, not continuous deployment.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the Windows Linux debate where people are really passionate one way or another about it. My opinion, for what it's worth, is we should treat it like zero trust, and it should always be continuous delivery. You only go continuous deployment when you have a justifiable reason to do so.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit how that impact, I mean, it's probably a whole session, but talk a little bit about that philosophical difference and why you think it's important to be one way or the other?
So I'll tell you, when I first started DevOps.com, it wasn't deployment, it was delivery. And then it kind of morphed into deployment with 10x deployments a day. But it reminds me, when I first got into security in 2001, my first security company I started, we came out with something called IPS, Intrusion Prevention Systems. Intrusion detection, IDS, was all the rage. And me and my co-founders said, no brainer, who wouldn't want to just stop the damn attack instead of getting alerted about the attack? We went out of business, okay? Because that's the way the world works. They did it, well, I'm hoping maybe it's changed. Yeah?
I went from a commercial organization to a defense industry organization, and it's a whole different mindset.
Yes. And we worked with some of those too, but we've certainly seen a shift. Deployment is where it's at.
Yeah, I would say it's a journey, right? I think you should be picking platforms that allow you to take, let's say you are not ready to do deployment, you start with delivery, you create your paved paths, or what is called as golden paths to production, where security, governance, reliability, and there is a whole spectrum of things around production readiness. And if you're in the federal government, you have to have ATO on that. So there is all those checks and balances are there. Then you graduate to the world of deployment. And if you let's say go back, then you have to pay the penalty of going back to delivery along with that. So if your platforms or tools are not allowing you that flexibility, where some of the teams who have done the hard work are doing continuous deployment, and some of the teams who are still in the process are doing continuous delivery, then most likely the platform is not the right one for you. Yeah.
Yes. We've got to stop. I'm sorry. You want to come up and talk to Sid, Bashir, Eyal? Thank you, all three of you, and JFrog and Harness and CloudBees. Thank you all for sitting through this. Enjoy the rest of RSA. This is the best RSA I've seen in years. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you all. Be well.
Sir.